So, Reverend Greg Seiler, it's so good to see you, as always, and lovely to have a chance to visit a little bit and talk about music from Poplar Hill, the Joe Ricks music series. So, you are the rector of St. George's Episcopal in Valley Lee, which is the home of the series. It's the location, and you've been part of the founding effort of the series, a big part of the organization of it. So it's very nice to have a chance to visit. I wonder if St. George's has really an intriguing and, in a way, kind of classic early American history, and I wonder if you would share just a little bit about the church's history here in Valley Lee.
Sure, sure. Yeah, so St. George's has been here. There has been a church on this site since they think as early as 1638, as late as 1642, when there was a westward movement from the capital in St. Mary's City. Just about 50 feet north of the present church, there's probably the first church was planted there. Interesting that it was here that there were three, they called them treaty oaks. There were three very large oaks, the last of which came down, had to be taken down, I believe in the 1980s. And it was here where some kind of treaty seemed to be signed or entered into between the indigenous persons and the English settlers. Here then it was some kind of significant gathering space, and it's equally significant that then they built a church building. Of course, relative to its time, that would have been completely normal, but I can gather that in that period, that was probably the first fixed dwelling and probably the most significant dwelling space around here, with the exception of a few simple working cabins huddled together. So it's been neat that this space, literally this ground, has been a space for gathering, a space for people coming together, a fascinating space of people finding some common agreement, indigenous persons as well as English settlers coming across, and a space that's just been home to all kinds of different activities. Of course, the church in early American history was a space for worship. It was a space for rites of passage and rituals, but it was probably also the main and the only gathering space here. So it's neat to gather here in the 21st century in similar ways, worship and rites of passage, but it's also really neat just to gather and pull together people in this, literally, this piece of ground, which has been a gathering spot going back nearly 400 years.
Isn't that interesting? It's almost as if there's something about this place that invites gatherings.
Yeah.
And of course, we're excited to be able to gather here for the Music from Poplar Hill concerts, because as it turns out, the little historic church here has really amazing acoustics. One of the first things I thought the first time I walked into the church was, my goodness, what wonderful acoustics in this space. And it's also an intimate space, so it really lends itself for very personal musical gatherings. You wouldn't bring a symphony orchestra in, but for a chamber music concert, such as the one we have tonight, or a jazz trio, such as the group we had a couple weeks ago, it's really a chance for an audience to be near to the performers, and especially for the young people who come. I think for them it's, of course it's exciting to go up to the Kennedy Center and see it from a distance, but to have a chance to see it up close the way you can in St. George's. And then, of course, the congregation here very generously and graciously funded the cost of a lovely Steinway piano a number of years ago. So that really, those things combined, plus the openness of the people here to the idea, makes it possible to do this. So, Music from Poplar Hill is it is a secular music series. It's intended for the whole community, and the idea is to offer a wide range of musical opportunities and styles and interests. So I'd be interested in hearing your perspective as the rector of St. George's on what your um, what what your hopes are for the series. You know, what you wish for in having this series here at St. George's.
Yeah. I think it's, in part, it's about claiming the space and claiming the gifts of being a gathering space. One of the working mission statements in the Episcopal Book of Common Prayer is that the church exists to restore all persons to unity. Um, and so obviously the church, the institution, as well as on the spiritual level, the body of Christ, if it exists to restore all persons to unity, it would carry that out through all kinds of ways. The more traditionally defined aspects of church life being among them, but not limiting the ways in which the church goes about restoring persons to unity. So I do think that there's this kind of element that the church has now. Now that there is an increasing gap between church and community, in which that gap is being filled by all kinds of new, exciting ways in which people are pursuing meaning and finding ways to restore persons to unity. The church then has an opportunity to figure out how it can play in its own work and work with its own culture to reach out and to become once again a more integral part of its own community, as well as to gather people, and to gather people in a way that allows, for the church's perspective, God to be the agent of whatever is going to happen in that space, so that there is just as much sacredness in a jazz trio, in a classical concert, as there is at a private baptism, as there is at a large celebration of, say, Christmas Eve or Easter morning. That there's an inherent sacredness to human gathering in which people, hopefully people from relatively diverse walks of life, are able to gather in a place that has been a home for gathering for years and centuries, and to work on that restoring, that restorative, which is inherently kind of sacred work of bringing people back to their true self and allowing them to inhabit a space where the mystery and the spirit could show up.
And the mystery of creativity as well.
Yeah, right. Creativity is, it's just one of these marvelous gifts that that we are given. Who knows where it comes from? There's certainly training and skill involved, but just to be in the presence of someone who is creative and who is creating something, to me, brings me closer into relationship with the divine and opens up a new appreciation for human giftedness. And so I think sponsoring, but not just sponsoring, really intentionally creating a space for creativity in our community is inherently sacred work. So it's therefore the work of the church to also be involved in that work, just like all kinds of other organizations we hope are involved in that holy, sacred, life-giving work in our community.
Right, right. One of the things we've talked about a lot in the founding of Music from Poplar Hill, Joe Rick's music series, is providing a home for creativity, to provide a place for it, for the folks who are doing the creating and for folks to come and be in the presence of it. which is something I think we all need, especially these days. I think that um, giving an opportunity for adults and kids alike to come and witness that and perhaps be inspired to buy it, to allow it to awaken their creativity. It's a it's a lovely gift to offer. And I often think of past times where churches, depending on their location, but churches might be a real center for a community, regardless of individual beliefs but and of course they were spaces for religious practice and the expression of religious belief, but they might also be, a place for a child to go and get tutoring, as Ascension, our sister church, offers. St. George's sister church offers that, or a place for civic groups to gather. And there's that word again, gathering.
Yeah, yeah. Well, right. If there's ever been a need for human gathering, that need has never been felt as deeply and profoundly as it is right now. In particular, here on whatever end of this pandemic we find ourselves, if this is even an end of this pandemic. But in particular, then the question becomes gathering for what, right? And one of the great gifts of being kind of planted where we are and given some resources as the church is that then we're freed up to ask that question: for what? For what shall we gather people? And how can we gather people beyond the things that kind of feel to them or to us like would be inherently divisive or broken, but point people to a mystery. I mean, right? Churches being used as polling places is equally sacred and holy work, because there's no agenda, but instead the gathering, the practicing of a civic gathering space. So this new fresh opportunity in this really truly small, but as you said, intimate space. Right, it's as wide as it is deep, with amazing acoustics from front to back. Our forebears knew a lot about what we could do, and maybe it just came more instinctively to them how to just inhabit multiple spaces at any given moment without feeling like we have to bifurcate our own self into different categories: religion, culture, politics, work. Maybe that's key to that word restoration. The gift of creativity, and the gift of musical creativity in particular, is that it touches us on all elements of ourself. And suddenly we realize we're not kind of bifurcated individuals who go to work and then go to a concert and then go home, but it's the whole person, and it's the work of kind of restoring who I am, made as a beloved in God's own community. So just to sit and receive that space and that gift in that space is just remarkable and healing as well.
I think so too. And I think for the head and the heart and the body
Yeah.
to experience that.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So in closing, I'll ask you about our first event. This evening, of course, we have violin and piano, the Stern Andrist duo, classical. 2 weeks ago, we had this wonderful jazz trio that came. Was there something in particular about that event that either surprised you or grabbed you or
I don't know if I was surprised. I expected to be moved. I expected to be inspired. I don't know if I expected to be humbled and challenged in the way that I was. You know, and that it really. I said to Aman, my wife, after both Friday evening and Saturday morning, I said, I feel like I went to church. And literally, I did go to church,
Right.
but I felt like I went to church.
Right,
In a manner of speaking.
You've been to church.
Really, yeah.
Right.
You just I felt it somewhere deep in my bones, in a place that could also humble me and challenge me. Because one of the things that we're setting out to do as a church is to also go back and claim our own history and, in fact, wrestle with our history and face it. And face it, the Episcopal Church has been an historically white Christian denomination, and we have been complicit in ways. We have done things and we have left things undone in our own history to enforce and to reinforce systemic structural injustice, largely centered in our American experience around race. And so, to be brought into that experience in this church in a way that would propel us forward and say, look into your closets, recognize the things that are there. You know, Rochelle's whole work on coming home and recognizing that home is a place where we are welcomed and loved, and home is a place in which we are also challenged and in which we challenge. That notion of home and claiming it as expansively as we can instead of exclusive is a real opportunity. And like I said, it just really humbled me to think this is the work that we need to be about. As frankly, for me, as a straight white male Christian in America in the 21st century, but also for this church and for this community in many ways. We sit here in a churchyard, which we very well likely know that there are African American slaves buried here, but unmarked. And so, how can we claim their presence here as well, and claim our role in denigrating their presence, as well as kind of lift them up with the whole company of saints? That would be really healing, powerful, and reconciling work, which this church or any church could do. And to have it kind of dovetailed with the performance some weeks ago was just equally, like I said, inspiring, moving, but also really humbling and really challenging.
Those are interesting observations. And yes, I think this was the Rochelle Rice performance a couple of weeks ago. And the way she invited people to engage with her and really reached out in such a personal way, I think was a real gift. Yeah. Well, it's wonderful to see you.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming by to visit, and I hope you enjoy this evening's performance.
We will. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Greg.
Thanks.